The sound that greets the men is not imagined. It is not simulated. Artillery thunders in the distance with the flat, concussive rhythm of real war, echoing across fields where American soldiers crawl through mud under live fire. These are training grounds in name only. Just miles away, shells are falling on other men who will not rise again. The boundary between rehearsal and reality has been deliberately erased. They run until their legs fail them. When bodies collapse, instructors do not rush forward with concern or explanation. Orders are repeated. Men are pulled upright. Rifles are pressed back into trembling hands. No one is told how long this will last or why mercy is absent. The only certainty is that stopping is not permitted. Exhaustion is not a signal. It is a condition to be endured. The contradiction is impossible to miss. The war is already killing them in Europe and North Africa. Yet here, far from the front lines, training is engineered to feel worse than combat itself. The drills are longer than missions. The sleep is shorter than what the battlefield will allow. Confusion is not corrected immediately. It is allowed to fester, to force decisions under strain. This is not how armies have traditionally prepared men for war. Quietly, officers begin to question what they are witnessing. They do not protest openly, but concerns circulate in low voices and after-action reports. Is this preparation or punishment disguised as doctrine? Are these men being hardened or broken before they ever face the enemy? Medical staff record rising cases of collapse and strain. The data suggests risk. The methods suggest intent. Elsewhere, German forces continue their advance with disciplined efficiency. Time is not a theoretical concept. It is measured in ground lost and lives taken. While the enemy sharpens its edge in combat, American troops are being driven past endurance without explanation or reassurance. The pressure does not ease when news from the front grows worse. It intensifies. At the center of this stands the man responsible, unmoved by discomfort his own or anyone else's. He offers no rest days to restore morale, no speeches to soften the strain. Comfort, in his view, is a liability. Excuses are a luxury war does not grant. He does not frame this as suffering. He frames it as necessity. This is not cruelty for its own sake. It is a philosophy shaped by past wars and future casualties, one that assumes fear and fatigue are inevitable and must be mastered before bullets make the introduction permanent. And as the men struggle to understand why training feels like survival, the answer remains just out of reach, waiting in the mind of George S. Patton. Long before his soldiers learn his methods, they learn his name. George S. Patton arrives with a reputation already sharpened, brilliant and profane, precise and mercilessly fast. To some, he's a commander forged for modern war. To others, a relic of an older, harsher age. Patton does not attempt to correct either view. Reputation, like fear, is something he believes should work ahead of him. At the core of his thinking is a belief that unsettles more comfortable commanders. Wars are not decided when armies meet, but long before, in training grounds where habits are formed and illusions are either reinforced or destroyed. Battles, in Patton's view, merely reveal what preparation has already made inevitable. If men fail under fire, it is not because the moment was unfair, it is because their leaders were dishonest beforehand. That conviction is not accidental. From childhood, Patton immersed himself in the study of warfare with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Ancient campaigns, cavalry charges, modern mechanized doctrine, he consumed them not as stories, but as warnings. He did not admire courage alone. He searched relentlessly for the precise moments when armies collapsed, not physically, but psychologically. Again and again, he found the same answer. Breakdown came not from enemy strength, but from internal unpreparedness. To Patton, failure in combat is not a shared tragedy. It is a moral failure of command. Men panic because they were allowed to believe panic was abnormal. They freeze because exhaustion surprised them. In that sense, mercy in training becomes deception. It teaches expectations the battlefield will never honor. Leadership, he believes, carries the burden of removing those lies before they can kill. Fatigue, therefore, is not treated as a human limit deserving accommodation. It is treated as an enemy weapon, one that must be encountered early, controlled deliberately, and stripped of its power. Patton does not deny its cost. He denies its inevitability. If exhaustion can paralyze decision-making, then decision-making must be practiced inside exhaustion. He studies past wars with clinical detachment, charting when cohesion failed and why. The pattern is consistent. Armies broke when comfort shaped their assumptions. Rest bred fragility. Order dissolved the moment chaos arrived, uninvited. From this, Patton draws a conclusion as stark as it is controversial. Comfort, he decides, kills more soldiers than bullets. And with that belief as his foundation, training ceases to be preparation alone. It becomes a deliberate confrontation with everything war will later deliver, without warning a philosophy that will soon be tested, not on paper, but on exhausted men forced to prove whether Patton's certainty can survive reality. To George S. Patton, exhaustion is not an unfortunate byproduct of training. It is the point. He speaks of fatigue the way other commanders speak of enemy fire, not as something to be avoided, but as something to be faced deliberately, under controlled conditions, before it can ambush men at the worst possible moment. In his mind, exhaustion is a rehearsal for terror, and terror is the true battlefield constant. Training zones are chosen with intent. They are placed close enough to combat that the distant percussion of artillery is not theoretical. The ground trembles. The air carries unfamiliar echoes. Men learn, without being told, that war does not announce itself politely. By the time they reach the front, the sounds will not be new. They will already belong to memory. Noise is layered into drills until it overwhelms thought. Orders are shouted, then contradicted, then cut off entirely. Confusion is not corrected immediately. It is allowed to linger. Fear is not addressed with reassurance. It is left intact. The goal is not calm. The goal is function. Soldiers are expected to navigate, aim, and decide while their bodies insist they cannot. In this environment, men do not learn to think after fear subsides. They learn to think inside it. Reflex replaces deliberation. Habit replaces hesitation. The mind, pressed repeatedly against its limits, begins to operate without the expectation of clarity or rest. This is not accidental conditioning. It is methodical. Medical officers watch with increasing concern. Reports note collapse, rising error rates, and growing resentment among the ranks. They warn that mistakes made under extreme fatigue could kill men before combat ever begins. They speak of morale, long-term strain, and the invisible damage that does not heal cleanly. Their arguments are measured and largely ignored. Patton listens. He does not dispute the risks. He accepts them. War, as he understands it, does not allow for clean equations. It only allows for trade-offs. The question is not whether men will break, but when and under whose supervision. A man who collapses in training may recover. A man who freezes under fire rarely gets that chance. So the calculation is made without sentiment. Better that weakness surface early, where it can be corrected or removed, than reveal itself when correction is no longer possible. Better that fear arrive now, stripped of consequence, than later, armed with bullets and consequence alike. In Patton's philosophy, training does not simulate death. It stands in for it close enough to teach its lessons, distant enough to let survivors carry them forward. And as exhaustion tightens its grip, the men do not yet know that this grim rehearsal is preparing them for something even less forgiving, waiting just beyond the training lines. By the early years of the war, the United States possesses something no other nation can match. Industrial scale. Factories hum without pause. Assembly lines stretch for miles. Tanks, trucks, aircraft, and artillery pieces emerge in numbers that suggest inevitability. There is a growing belief, both civilian and military, that production itself will decide the conflict, that quantity, properly applied, will overwhelm any enemy still bound by older limits. This confidence is not entirely unfounded. American industry will, in time, prove decisive. But early on, it conceals a dangerous truth. The nation has little experience with prolonged, large-scale modern warfare against a disciplined enemy. Its army is expanding faster than its institutional memory. Many officers have trained men efficiently, cleanly, and according to doctrine but not brutally. The assumption takes hold that machines will compensate for what men lack. Technology becomes reassurance. Radios will clarify confusion. Vehicles will shorten exposure. Firepower will substitute for nerve. The belief is subtle but pervasive, that human weakness can be engineered around. Training reflects this optimism. Drills are orderly. Schedules are predictable. Fatigue is managed. Chaos is minimized. The battlefield, it is assumed, will be no worse than the manuals describe. To George S. Patton, this is not optimism. It is self-deception elevated to strategy. He does not doubt the power of American industry. He doubts the conclusions drawn from it. Machines, in his view, do not erase human limits, they expose them. A tank amplifies decisiveness or hesitation equally. A radio magnifies clarity or confusion. Technology accelerates outcomes. It does not improve judgment. Patton argues that discipline must precede equipment, not follow it. A poorly trained man with advanced tools is not safer, he is faster at failing. War, as Patton understands it, does not reward potential, it rewards performance under stress. And stress is precisely what sanitized training avoids. Orderly exercises create orderly expectations, and orderly expectations collapse the moment the first plan fails. His critique extends beyond doctrine to culture itself. America is not accustomed to prolonged brutality. It believes in solutions, timelines, and recovery. War offers none of these. It grinds. It exhausts. It punishes assumptions. Patton fears that a nation raised on comfort and efficiency may mistake production for preparation. This places him at odds with peers who see his methods as unnecessary severity. Why exhaust men when equipment can protect them? Why introduce chaos when coordination is the goal? To Patton, the answers are obvious. Because equipment breaks, plans fracture, coordination dissolves, and when that happens, only discipline remains. The clash is not merely professional. It is philosophical. One vision trusts systems. The other trusts conditioning. One believes war can be managed. The other believes it must be endured. As American forces continue to prepare behind orderly lines, Patton presses his men in ways that feel deliberately out of step with the nation they represent. And as this tension grows, a comparison begins to take shape, one that Patton studies closely between how Americans prepare for war and how their enemy already has. By the time American forces enter the war in earnest, the German army is no longer experimenting with how men respond to stress. It has already paid for those lessons in blood. Its doctrine emphasizes speed, initiative, and action under pressure. Principles forged not in theory, but in campaigns where hesitation proved fatal. Orders are expected to be interpreted, not awaited. Confusion is assumed. Exhaustion is built into the plan. German recruits are conditioned accordingly. Training places men under sustained strain, demanding movement, coordination, and judgment when clarity is absent. Fatigue is not treated as a breakdown, but as a baseline. Disorientation is not corrected immediately. It is endured. The intent is not cruelty, but reliability, creating soldiers who function when systems fail and leaders fall silent. Early encounters expose the difference. Allied units, well-equipped and numerically strong, sometimes hesitate under sudden fire. Radios fall quiet. Timetables slip. Men trained for orderly execution pause when the situation no longer resembles the exercise. These moments are brief, but costly. The Germans exploit them with practice speed. To George S. Patton, these failures are not mysteries. He studies them with cold clarity, reading reports not for blame, but for pattern. Again and again, the cause is the same: expectation. Men freeze not because they lack courage, but because the moment violates what training taught them to expect. Fatigue arrives sooner than planned. Noise overwhelms orders. Initiative hesitates. Patton refuses to allow those moments to repeat themselves. He does not admire German ideology, but he respects German preparation. Where others see brutality, he sees realism. Comfort-driven training, he believes, merely delays weakness until the enemy can exploit it. If men are going to falter, better that it happen under supervision, where lessons can be learned and habits corrected. His philosophy is simple and uncompromising. Fatigue exposes weakness before the enemy can. It strips away rehearsed confidence and reveals what remains. Under exhaustion, discipline either holds or it does not. There is no performance. There is only behavior. From this, Patton draws a line that many find unsettling. Rest, while necessary, is not protection. Comfort is not resilience. Discipline earned under pressure is the only shield that endures when plans dissolve. German forces have learned this through defeat and adaptation. Patton intends for his men to learn it without paying the same price. The contrast becomes impossible to ignore. One army prepares men for ideal conditions, trusting systems to compensate. The other prepares men for collapse, trusting discipline to compensate. As Patton reshapes his training to reflect this reality, resistance grows at home not from the enemy, but from within his own ranks. And as the lessons of the battlefield press harder, the question shifts from doctrine to leadership. How much strain can an army endure before preparation itself becomes the enemy? The resistance does not begin loudly. It moves through the ranks in fragments, complaints, spoken after lights out, concerns folded into reports, glances exchanged when another exercise is extended without explanation. Men do not refuse orders, they endure them. But endurance carries a cost, and that cost begins to register in morale assessments and medical logs alike. Officers feel the pressure first. They are trained to preserve fighting spirit, to balance discipline with confidence. As exhaustion deepens, many begin to fear not enemy contact, but internal fracture. A tired unit, they argue, may obey, but it may not believe. And belief, in modern armies, is considered essential. Better to risk tactical imperfection, some insist, than to hollow out the will to fight before combat even begins. To George S. Patton, this concern misses the point entirely. Popularity is not a metric he recognizes. Approval is not an outcome he measures. The only standard that matters is whether men perform when fear arrives uninvited. Training, in his view, is not designed to be endured comfortably. It is designed to be remembered under fire. Patton believes resentment is temporary. Battlefield terror is not. Anger at commanders fades once bullets begin to fly. Panic does not. If men curse their general in training but move decisively in combat, Patton considers the exchange acceptable. Leadership, as he understands it, is not about being trusted in comfort. It is about being proven right when comfort disappears. Then the accidents occur. Vehicles overturned during night maneuvers. Live fire exercises result in injuries. Medical officers document preventable harm and cite fatigue as a contributing factor. The incidents do not remain quiet. They reinforce opposition to Patton's methods and give his critics tangible evidence that intensity has crossed into recklessness. Patton's response is not what his opponents expect. He does not ease the tempo. He does not soften the drills. He increases intensity. To him, accidents are not proof that training is too hard. They are proof that men are still surprised by strain. War, he knows, will not pause to accommodate learning curves. It will impose its lessons instantly and without apology. His logic is brutal, but internally consistent. If training accidents expose weakness, then weakness has been exposed early enough to address. Reducing pressure would only delay the reckoning. Better to confront limits now, when mistakes can still be analyzed, than later, when mistakes are terminal. This posture isolates him further. Leadership becomes lonely by design. Patton accepts the role of antagonist to comfort, knowing history rarely thanks such men. He does not argue that his approach is kind. He argues that war is not, because the enemy will not negotiate with morale reports. Exhaustion will not respect intentions. And when training becomes unpopular leadership, Patton chooses unpopularity without hesitation, convinced that the battlefield will eventually deliver its own verdict, indifferent to how the lesson was taught. To George S. Patton, exhaustion is not chaos. It is a variable. Like terrain or weather, it can be anticipated, shaped, and if approached, correctly used. He rejects the idea that fatigue is an unavoidable decline into disorder. Instead, he treats it as a condition that can be mastered through exposure, repetition, and ruthless honesty about human limits. Training is redesigned accordingly. Men are required to shoot accurately after forced marches that drain strength from their arms. Navigation exercises begin when daylight fades and continue after bodies insist they should stop. Decisions are demanded when hands shake and concentration frays. The goal is not excellence and comfort, but reliability and depletion. Performance is measured not at peak readiness, but at the point where instinct must replace energy. Sleep, once protected as recovery, becomes another controlled stressor. Nights are shortened without warning. Alarms are sounded just as rest begins to take hold. Orders arrive incomplete. Men learn that exhaustion does not excuse inaction. It merely changes the conditions under which action must occur. Over time, sleep deprivation loses its shock. Fatigue becomes familiar, still painful, but no longer paralyzing. Confusion drills are layered into this deprivation. Communications are deliberately interrupted. Messages contradict one another. Command structures are blurred. Leaders issue orders that must be interpreted rather than followed verbatim. The exercise is not about obedience. It is about judgment when guidance disappears. War, Patton knows, rarely offers complete information. It punishes those who wait for it. Leadership itself is tested under strain. Officers are rotated unexpectedly, placed in unfamiliar roles while exhausted, and observed closely. Some rise, others falter. Rank offers no insulation from exposure. Weakness, once revealed, is addressed without ceremony. The purpose is not humiliation, it is clarity. A man who cannot lead while tired cannot be trusted to lead while afraid. As weeks pass, the training grows heavier, not physically, but psychologically. Men begin to understand that relief will not come from schedules or reassurance. It will come only from adaptation. The drills stop feeling like preparation and start feeling like survival. The mind resists first. Then, gradually, it adjusts. Something subtle changes. Complaints become shorter. Panic gives way to routine. Exhaustion remains, but it no longer dominates thought. Soldiers learn that they can function beyond what they believed was their limit. Not heroically, quietly. The discovery is not celebrated. It is absorbed. By the time combat finally arrives, many will say privately that the training felt worse, not because it was more dangerous, but because it was more uncertain. In battle, the enemy is visible. In training, exhaustion itself was the adversary, constant and impersonal. It could not be outmaneuvered, only endured. Those who survive this process do not emerge louder or more confident in the way propaganda imagines. They emerge steadier. Their movements waste less energy. Their decisions require fewer words. They no longer expect clarity before acting. They act, then adjust. Patton understands this transformation without sentiment. Fatigue, once weaponized by the enemy, has been reclaimed. It no longer surprises. It no longer dictates behavior. It has been folded into the men's understanding of themselves. And as these units prepare to leave the training grounds, there is no ceremony to mark the change. Only a quiet realization, shared but unspoken, that when the real test comes, exhaustion will arrive as an old acquaintance, not a sudden ambush. As the training intensifies, the records grow thicker. Medical officers document rising levels of physical strain, stress fractures, nervous exhaustion, recurring collapse from sleep deprivation. Mental fatigue is harder to quantify, but its presence is unmistakable. Men report disorientation that lingers beyond drills. Tempers shorten. Silence lengthens. The data does not accuse, but it does not absolve either. Within command circles, ethical questions surface cautiously at first, then with increasing urgency. Preparation has always carried cost, but the scale and intent of this program feel different. Training is no longer merely demanding. It is deliberately oppressive. The distinction matters because armies are not only instruments of violence, they are custodians of the men who wield it. The central question refuses to resolve itself cleanly. Is battlefield effectiveness worth long-term damage to soldiers who may survive the war but not escape its imprint? There are no neutral answers. A man spared panic under fire may carry exhaustion into peace. Another spared exhaustion in training may freeze once, catastrophically, when it matters most. Commanders argue statistics. Doctors argue recovery. Philosophers argue nothing at all, because war rarely grants them standing. To George S. Patton, the debate is not theoretical. He does not dismiss the cost. He acknowledges it openly, even privately. But acknowledgement does not produce hesitation. War, in his view, is not a spectrum of humane choices. It is a narrowing corridor where every option carries harm, and leadership consists of choosing which harm arrives first. Patton rejects the idea that suffering can be eliminated. It can only be displaced. Either men suffer under supervision, where damage may be mitigated and lessons extracted, or they suffer under fire, where panic multiplies casualties without discrimination. To him, the greater cruelty is not strain in training. It is sending men into chaos unprepared and calling the outcome honorable. Responsibility, as Patton defines it, does not mean preserving comfort. It means preventing collapse. Panic, once unleashed, cannot be recalled. It spreads faster than orders and ignores rank entirely. A single moment of mass hesitation can unravel weeks of planning and cost hundreds of lives. Patton believes it is his moral obligation to deny panic its first opportunity. This logic disturbs many of his peers. They do not question his intent, but his certainty. Can cruelty truly be preventive? Or does it merely harden institutions to suffering they no longer feel accountable for? At what point does preparation stop serving soldiers and begin consuming them? These questions are debated in offices far from the training fields, where the noise does not intrude and exhaustion remains abstract. The Army as an institution finds itself divided not between compassion and callousness, but between competing definitions of care. One side believes care means protection from harm wherever possible. The other believes care means exposure to harm before it becomes lethal. Both claim moral ground. Neither can fully disprove the other. Patton stands largely alone in his refusal to compromise. He does not soften language or search for justification beyond outcome. History, he believes, will not measure intentions. It will measure whether men held when fear arrived. Everything else, including his reputation, is secondary. Yet even he understands the weight of what he demands. His philosophy leaves no space for innocence, only for survival. Men will curse him. Some will break. Some will carry scars, no report records. Patton accepts this not as tragedy, but as the price of command in a war that offers no gentle exits. As the debate continues unresolved, training does not pause. The drills continue. The strain deepens. And somewhere beyond the ethical arguments, the men themselves move closer to the moment that will answer the question no committee can whether this line, once crossed, truly saves more lives than it costs. By this stage, the boundary between training and war has almost disappeared. The distant thunder of artillery bleeds into drills without pause, sometimes punctuating commands, sometimes drowning them out entirely. The noise is not explained or apologized for. It is simply present. Men stop asking whether the sound is part of the exercise. It does not matter. Their bodies respond the same way either way. Fear, once sharp and disruptive, begins to change character. It does not vanish, but it settles into something more familiar, less dramatic, more constant. Hearts still race, hands still sweat, but the reaction no longer surprises them. Fear becomes a condition, not an event. Soldiers stop reacting to it and start operating within it, the way one works around bad weather, rather than waiting for clear skies. Hesitation fades gradually, not through courage, but through repetition. Movements that once required thought now occur without discussion. Orders are absorbed faster. Adjustments are made instinctively. When something goes wrong, men no longer freeze in search of perfect clarity. They act, then correct. Reflex replaces deliberation, not because deliberation is useless, but because there is no time left for it. Shared suffering reshapes the smallest units first. Squads that once consisted of strangers become tightly bound by exhaustion, endured together. The weight of fatigue is carried collectively. When one man falters, another compensates without instruction. Bonds form not through speeches or symbols, but through nights without sleep and days without relief. Trust grows because it has been tested under strain. Gradually, expectations change. Men stop waiting for rescue from exhaustion. They no longer believe relief is imminent or guaranteed. This is not despair. It is adjustment. Once the illusion of rescue disappears, energy is conserved differently. Complaints diminish not because conditions improve, but because protest no longer serves a purpose. Survival does. Confidence begins to emerge, but it is quiet and restrained. There are no declarations of toughness, no bravado. The men who have adapted do not announce it. They simply endure more efficiently. They speak less. They waste fewer movements. They recover faster, not because they are rested, but because they understand themselves better. To George S. Patton, this transformation is the objective. The goal has never been to inspire enthusiasm. It has been to eliminate surprise. Fear that is expected loses much of its power. Exhaustion that is familiar no longer dictates behavior. The battlefield does not feel manageable, but it feels recognizable. The most profound change is not physical. It is psychological. The men no longer carry themselves like civilians placed temporarily in uniform. Their posture shifts. Their reactions sharpen. They begin to think in terms of terrain, timing, and each other, rather than schedules or fairness. War is no longer an abstract future event. It has been allowed into their daily routine. By the time orders arrive to move closer to the front, there is no ceremony marking readiness, no final test, no reassurance. The men shoulder their equipment with practiced motions and little conversation. They have already lived under the shadow of death long enough to understand its presence does not always announce itself. What awaits them will be louder, faster, and irreversible. But it will not be unfamiliar. And as they move forward, one question remains unanswered. Not whether the training was harsh, but whether it was enough to hold when the first real contact strips away even the illusion of safety. When George S. Patton's forces finally move into active combat zones, they do so already depleted. The marches have not eased. Sleep has not been restored. There is no deliberate attempt to present the men at peak condition. If anything, the timing feels cruelly precise, as if the moment of contact has been chosen to arrive when reserves are lowest. But this, too, is intentional. War does not wait for readiness. It arrives when it chooses. The German resistance they encounter is disciplined, violent, and immediate. Fire is accurate. Movement is rapid. There is no probing pause, no gradual escalation. The enemy acts as trained, pressing weakness, exploiting hesitation, punishing exposure. For units unaccustomed to chaos, this kind of contact often produces shock. Here, the shock is muted, not because the fire is lighter, but because it is familiar. Under sudden pressure, cohesion holds. Squads compress instinctively. Men move where they are needed without awaiting detailed instruction. When communications falter, action does not. The drills that once felt arbitrary now surface without conscious recall. Positions are taken. Fields of fire are established. Adjustments are made quickly, sometimes imperfectly, but without paralysis. Decisions are made without hesitation, not because they are easy, but because delay no longer feels safer. Officers issue orders with fewer words. Subordinates execute them without searching for reassurance. The training has stripped away the expectation of clarity. Action has become the default response to uncertainty. Fatigue, which once dominated thought, now registers as background noise. It is still present heavy, persistent, but it does not surprise. The men have already learned what exhaustion feels like when layered with confusion and fear. Combat does not introduce a new sensation. It intensifies an old one. That familiarity matters. Observers begin to notice what is absent. There are fewer freezes, fewer men rooted in place, unable to process what is happening. Breakdowns still occur. War does not erase human limits, but they are isolated rather than contagious. Panic does not spread. It fails to gain momentum. The line bends, but it does not dissolve. Medical officers note the same pattern. Stress reactions appear, but later than expected. Men continue functioning longer before faltering. The difference is not heroism, it is expectation. They were taught, repeatedly, that fear and fatigue would arrive together. When they do, the moment feels less like betrayal and more like confirmation. For Patton, this is the test that matters. Not success measured in territory or speed, but behavior measured in seconds. Does the unit hold when surprised? Does decision-making survive exhaustion? Do men continue to act when plans fracture? In these moments, the answers arrive without commentary. The training reveals its purpose quietly, not in speeches or statistics, but in absence. Absence of collapse, absence of mass hesitation, absence of the chaos that consumes unprepared units in their first hours of contact. What remains is imperfect, strained, and human but functional. There is no celebration. Patton does not soften his tone or reduce demands. He observes, calculates, and moves on. Validation to him is not emotional. It is operational. The men may not yet understand what has been spared them, only that something expected did not occur. As the fighting continues, exhaustion deepens again. Losses accumulate. The war proves no kinder than anticipated. But one illusion has already been stripped away, that the first contact would be the moment that broke them. Instead, it becomes the moment that confirms a harsh truth training that once felt punitive has quietly transformed fear into something survivable. And as momentum begins to build, another question emerges, more dangerous than the last. What happens when an army trained to endure exhaustion discovers that endurance can be turned outward into speed and shock against the enemy? What follows first contact is not hesitation, but acceleration. George S. Patton's units move faster than intelligence estimates, predicted not because they are rested, but because they do not wait to recover before advancing. The pauses that normally follow engagement never fully materialize. Columns reform quickly. Orders propagate without friction. The tempo remains high even as fatigue deepens. At decisive moments, aggression replaces caution. This is not recklessness. It is a calculated refusal to slow down when uncertainty appears. Where doctrine often encourages consolidation, Patton's formations press forward, exploiting confusion before it can settle. They do not search for perfect alignment. They accept imperfect momentum over delayed precision. German defenders misjudge what they are facing. They expect exhaustion to blunt pursuit, to impose natural limits on advance. Instead, American units continue moving when logic suggests they should stop. The enemy interprets this as recklessness, at first, then realizes it is something else entirely. The Americans are not advancing because they are fresh. They are advancing because exhaustion no longer dictates their behavior. Momentum compounds success. Each forward movement shortens reaction time for the defenders. Each rapid decision denies them the opportunity to reset psychologically. Positions fall not always because they are overrun, but because they are abandoned. Orders arrive too late. Assumptions collapse. What begins as tactical pressure evolves into mental displacement. The most unsettling factor for the enemy is consistency. Exhausted men continue advancing with the same tempo as rested ones. Losses do not halt motion. Resistance slows progress, but does not arrest it. The expectation that fatigue will impose caution proves false. German doctrine, built on exploiting moments of enemy hesitation, finds fewer moments to exploit. Reports begin to note a subtle shift. Ground is yielded not because it is untenable, but because holding it feels increasingly futile. The psychological equation changes. Defenders realize they are facing units prepared to operate indefinitely under strain. The advantage once gained by enduring hardship now belongs to the attacker. This is where fatigue becomes asymmetric. Both sides are tired. Both sides are strained. But only one side anticipated this condition and trained inside it. For the Germans, exhaustion erodes initiative. For Patton's men, it has already been absorbed. The same stress produces different outcomes. Officers observe something unexpected. Men who would once have requested relief instead request direction. They do not ask how long the advance will continue. They ask where it goes next. The training has removed the internal negotiation that normally precedes action under strain. Decisions are made faster because fewer variables remain. The enemy feels this acceleration as pressure without release. There is no clean break between engagements, no predictable rhythm. The Americans appear relentless, not because they are immune to fatigue, but because they are indifferent to it. The distinction matters. For Patton, this is the conversion point. Fatigue, once feared as a limiting factor, has become an amplifier. Prepared exhaustion, sustained speed. Sustained speed generates shock. Shock unravels resistance before physical collapse occurs. The effect is cumulative and difficult to reverse once established. Yet even as momentum builds, there is no illusion of invincibility. Casualties continue. Mistakes still occur. The advance is costly. But something irreversible has taken hold. The enemy no longer believes time is on their side. As ground continues to fall, often faster than maps predicted, the real impact is measured not in miles, but in expectation. German defenders begin to assume the Americans will keep coming tired, disordered, but undeterred. And once that assumption sets in, the battle shifts again. Because the most decisive victories are rarely won when the enemy is destroyed, but when the enemy concludes too early that endurance itself is no longer enough. Success arrives without ceremony. Ground is taken, objectives secured, lines advanced, but the cost is unmistakable. Bodies remain where they fall. Vehicles burn along roads meant to lead forward. The training has not made war gentle. It has only made it survivable in ways that are difficult to measure. Victory, when it comes, carries no promise of redemption. Casualties remain heavy. Exhaustion does not stop bullets. And discipline does not render men invulnerable. Units that hold under pressure still lose soldiers. Leaders who make fast decisions still bury consequences. The difference is not absence of loss, but absence of collapse. The formations bend, absorb shock, and continue to function. Among the survivors, understanding emerges slowly. It is not articulated in speeches or reports. It surfaces in private moments when men realize how close they came to freezing and did not, how chaos arrived and passed without unraveling everything. The training they hated begins to reveal what it quietly spared them. Moments of panic that never took hold. Panic has not been eliminated. It cannot be. War still overwhelms individuals. Fear still breaks some men, but it spreads less often. It no longer cascades through units unchecked. What was once contagious becomes contained. The difference alters outcomes without announcing itself. To George S. Patton, this is the only validation that matters. He does not celebrate. He does not soften language or seek absolution. He calculates. He reviews behavior under fire, not morale after the fact. If men held, the method stands. If they did not, it is adjusted. Emotion does not enter the equation. The tactical results speak clearly enough. Advances continue. Enemy resistance weakens. Speed is maintained where others would pause. The methods that once drew condemnation now produce outcomes few can ignore. The argument that training was too harsh becomes harder to sustain when contrasted with units that collapsed elsewhere under lighter preparation. Gradually, the debate shifts. The language changes. Where once critics asked whether Patton's methods were moral, they now ask whether they were necessary. The distinction is subtle, but profound. Morality implies choice. Necessity implies constraint. War, as it unfolds, begins to supply its own answers. No one claims the approach is humane. Even its defenders avoid that word. Instead, they speak of reduced routes, preserved cohesion, and units that remain operational longer than expected. The benefits are statistical, not sentimental. They appear in after-action reports, not headlines. Patton remains unmoved by the changing tone. Vindication does not interest him. He does not seek recognition for lives saved indirectly or disasters prevented invisibly. He understands that success in war rarely looks like justice. It looks like survival misattributed to courage or luck. For the men who lived through it, the conclusion is simpler. The training was brutal. The war was worse. Between the two, one prepared them for the other. That realization arrives late, often too late to express to those who did not survive to share it. Victory, in Patton's view, does not erase responsibility. It confirms it. The burden of command remains heavy precisely because outcomes can never fully justify methods, only contextualize them. History may debate whether he went too far. The battlefield has already delivered its answer. And as operations continue and the war grinds on, the illusion that preparation can be gentle dissolves, entirely replaced by a harder question that no victory can resolve. How much suffering can be justified if it prevents something worse? What does not appear in casualty tables is often where the most decisive effects reside. The lives saved by Patton's training doctrine do not announce themselves. They are not clustered neatly around a single engagement or marked by dramatic reversals. They exist instead in absences, in units that did not rout, in moments that did not cascade into disaster, in men who lived through hours that might otherwise have destroyed them. Fewer routs mean fewer massacres. This is a truth learned repeatedly in modern war. When formations collapse, death multiplies quickly and indiscriminately. Panic compresses time, erases coordination, and exposes men to annihilation. Patton's forces, strained and depleted, still bend rather than shatter. The difference is measured not in heroism, but in containment. Discipline under exhaustion prevents the kind of catastrophic failure that turns defeat into slaughter. Men fall back in order rather than fleeing blindly. Weapons are recovered. Wounded are extracted. Small decisions made under pressure, hold here, move there, wait 5 seconds longer, alter outcomes that never make the historical record. Survival, in these moments, is cumulative. Many soldiers later struggle to articulate why they survived when others did not. They recall fear, confusion, exhaustion, but not paralysis. The training has rewritten instinct. When their minds searched for refuge, their bodies continued to function. They did not rise above fear. They moved through it. That distinction saves lives without ever asking for recognition. To George S. Patton, these invisible dividends matter more than accolades. He understands that armies are judged by victories, but preserved lives rarely factor into praise. No citation is awarded for a rout that never happened. No monument is built to a panic that was prevented. Statistics cannot easily capture this effect. Reports count casualties, not near casualties. They record losses, not collapses avoided. The ledger of prevention remains unwritten, yet commanders notice patterns. Units trained under sustained stress retain cohesion longer. They recover faster after shock. They do not require rescue as often from their own fear. Training, in this sense, alters probability rather than certainty. It does not guarantee survival. It narrows the margin where catastrophe takes hold. That narrowing accumulates across campaigns, shaping outcomes in ways that appear almost mundane when viewed from a distance. The men themselves feel this most acutely in retrospect. Long after the war, many recall the exhaustion of training more vividly than individual battles. Not because it was worse, but because it changed them earlier. It stripped away expectations before combat could punish them for holding on to those illusions. Patton never attempts to quantify this effect publicly. He knows the argument would fail in peacetime language. Saving lives indirectly lacks emotional clarity. It does not fit comfortably into speeches or ceremonies. It asks audiences to value what did not happen, rather than what did. Yet within the quiet calculus of command, these unrecorded survivals are decisive. An army that holds together longer preserves its fighting power. It shortens engagements. It reduces cumulative loss. The effect compounds invisibly, shaping the war's trajectory one intact unit at a time. Patton measures success in silence. He watches units move under fire and notes what does not occur: no sudden collapse, no uncontrolled retreat, no frantic loss of command. These absences confirm his philosophy more clearly than any victory parade could. But this form of success carries a cost that also remains largely unseen. Men survive, but not unchanged. The training that saved them rewired their responses in ways that do not always reverse cleanly. Exhaustion endured deliberately leaves marks that peace does not immediately erase. Survival, even when preserved, is not free. This complicates the moral ledger further. Lives saved today may carry burdens tomorrow. War does not provide balance sheets, only outcomes. Patton accepts this without comfort. He never argues that his methods are clean, only that they are effective where alternatives fail. As the campaigns continue and reports accumulate, the invisible pattern grows clearer to those willing to look. Fewer disasters, fewer moments where defeat accelerates into annihilation. The men still bleed. They still die, but they die as units, not as fragments. In the end, Patton's legacy in this regard resists simplification. He cannot point to a single battle and say, "Here, this life was saved by exhaustion." He can only point to continuity, to an army that endured when endurance was the only currency left. And as the war grinds toward its conclusion, the question shifts once more, not whether his methods worked, but whether any commander has the right to claim credit for lives saved through suffering imposed in advance. Long after the guns fall silent, George S. Patton carries controversy with him like a second uniform. It does not fade with victory. It does not resolve with time. His methods are remembered with equal parts admiration and condemnation, often by the same voices. To some, he is the commander who demanded what war would later demand anyway. To others, he is the embodiment of unnecessary severity, a man too willing to spend his soldiers' strength in advance. These judgments coexist because they must. Patton's record resists clean moral sorting. The same training that preserved cohesion also inflicted strain. The same intensity that prevented panic also produced resentment. There is no single ledger where credit and blame can be tallied separately. They are bound together, inseparable from the outcomes they produced. Leadership, at this level, reveals its loneliness. Patton does not share the burden of decision evenly. He absorbs it. Orders move downward. Consequences move upward. Men may curse the training, but responsibility does not diffuse with complaint. It concentrates. In moments of doubt, there is no committee to consult, no neutral ground to retreat to. The choice is made once, then lived with repeatedly. Gratitude rarely accompanies such decisions. Soldiers may survive because of preparation they despised, but survival does not automatically produce appreciation. Often, it produces distance. Men move on. They remember the hardship more vividly than the disaster that did not occur. Patton understands this. He does not expect thanks for suffering imposed. He expects only that men continue to function when it matters. History, however, is less restrained. It revisits his methods with the benefit of outcome and the comfort of hindsight. Critics ask, whether he went too far. Admirers ask whether others went far enough. The debate persists because it cannot be resolved by intention alone. Results inform judgment, but they do not absolve it. War offers no control group. There is no alternate campaign where Patton trained gently and achieved the same results, or trained gently and failed catastrophically. There is only the path taken and the consequences observed. This absence complicates every ethical conclusion. Arguments become counterfactual. Certainty becomes suspect. Those who condemn Patton often focus on the visible suffering of training, the exhaustion, the accidents, the resentment. Those who defend him focus on the invisible suffering avoided, the collapses that did not happen, the routes that never form. Both perspectives are incomplete on their own. Together, they form the tension that defines command in war. Patton himself never attempts to resolve this tension publicly. He does not seek moral clarity through explanation. He believes leadership is judged by outcomes, because outcomes are what remain when intention evaporates under fire. This belief does not make him indifferent to cost. It makes him resigned to it. Commanding men beyond comfort requires a particular kind of acceptance. Not acceptance of cruelty, but acceptance of responsibility for choosing between harms. Patton chooses to impose strain early rather than risk chaos later. He does not argue that the choice is clean, only that it is unavoidable. The loneliness of this position deepens because success rarely softens criticism. Victory does not erase doubt. It merely shifts its focus. Once effectiveness is demonstrated, the question becomes whether effectiveness alone is sufficient justification. Patton never answers this directly. He continues to act as though the question itself misunderstands war's constraints. For the men who served under him, memory fractures along personal lines. Some credit the training with their survival. Others remember only the exhaustion and bitterness. Both memories are true. Neither cancels the other. War does not standardize experience, even under standardized doctrine. As decades pass, Patton's legacy hardens into symbol. He becomes a proxy for a broader question that extends beyond his own career. What does a commander owe his men when the mission itself is inherently destructive? Comfort or preparation for the worst that comfort cannot survive? The absence of a definitive answer is not a failure of analysis. It is a reflection of reality. Judgment in war remains inseparable from outcome, because outcome is the only evidence war leaves behind. Intentions vanish. Methods blur. What remains are survivors, casualties, and the uneasy knowledge that different choices might have led elsewhere, but nowhere gentle. Patton accepts this ambiguity without attempting to escape it. He does not claim moral purity. He claims necessity. In doing so, he secures results while ensuring his name remains contested. Perhaps this is the final burden of commanding men beyond comfort. To succeed without absolution, history will continue to debate him, because debate is the luxury of peace. Patton never had that luxury when decisions were made. He had only time, pressure, and the knowledge that hesitation carries its own cost. And so his story endures not as a lesson in certainty, but as a warning about leadership itself, that in war, judgment is never clean, responsibility is never shared, and the line between preparation and cruelty can only be drawn by those willing to live with where it falls. War punishes illusions more reliably than it punishes enemies. It strips away assumptions with indifference, exposing what preparation concealed and what comfort protected too carefully. In the end, it does not ask what men believed would happen. It reveals what they were actually ready to endure. For George S. Patton, this truth was never abstract. He understood that the most dangerous illusions were not about victory or defeat, but about human limits, about how much fear, confusion, and exhaustion a man could withstand before breaking. Training, in his hands, became a deliberate confrontation with those illusions, long before bullets could do the same work irreversibly. That confrontation was a moral gamble. Every forced march, every sleepless night, every exercise that pushed men beyond what felt necessary carried risk. Lives were not merely prepared, they were wagered. The calculation was brutal in its simplicity. Suffer now under supervision, or suffer later without mercy. There was no version of war in which men escaped harm. There was only a choice about timing and control. Comfort, once trusted as protection, proved fragile. It created expectations the battlefield would not honor. Clean schedules, predictable rest, orderly drills, these offered reassurance, but little resilience. When chaos arrived uninvited, comfort shattered first. What remained was habit, instinct, conditioning earned through repetition under strain. Prepared exhaustion, it turned out, was stronger than surprised fear. Men who had already functioned while depleted did not need to renegotiate their limits under fire. They did not have to learn, in the worst moment of their lives, that they could still act while afraid. That lesson had already been absorbed, painfully and without ceremony. Patton's men endured what others could not because they were braver or stronger by nature, but because exhaustion no longer felt like betrayal. It was familiar. Fear did not arrive alone. It arrived accompanied by habits already forged. The battlefield did not feel fair, but it felt recognizable. This endurance did not produce triumph in the way victory parades suggest. There was no collective sense of having been proven right. There was only survival, often quiet and unremarked. Men moved forward because stopping was not an option they recognized anymore. The training had removed that expectation. The lesson itself was quiet. It did not announce success with banners or speeches. It emerged slowly, often after the fact, when men realized what had not happened, the panic that never spread, the retreat that never turned into rout, the hesitation that never fully took hold. These absences shaped outcomes more than any single moment of courage. Many hated the training while it saved them. In the moment, exhaustion felt punitive, unnecessary, even cruel. It stripped dignity and demanded obedience without explanation. There was no immediate reward for enduring it. Only later, sometimes much later, did understanding begin to surface. That understanding was rarely expressed aloud. It did not need to be. It appeared in the way veterans spoke about fear without exaggeration, about exhaustion without complaint. They had learned something before bullets taught it permanently, that survival depended less on feeling ready than on functioning without readiness. Patton never asked for gratitude. He did not frame his methods as enlightened or humane. He framed them as unavoidable. War, as he understood it, did not allow leaders the luxury of preserving innocence. It demanded that illusions be broken early, when repair was still possible. History continues to wrestle with this conclusion because it resists comfort. It offers no clean moral victory, only a hierarchy of harms. Training that wounds to prevent training that kills. Preparation that scars to prevent collapse. These are not lessons societies like to remember, but they are lessons war repeats relentlessly. In the end, exhaustion taught what bullets would have taught far less gently. That fear is survivable, that limits are negotiable, and that preparation is not about eliminating suffering, but about choosing where it will occur. The men learned this before they had to learn it under fire. They cursed the drills. They resented the demands. They questioned the necessity. And then the moment arrived when there was no time left to question anything at all. In that moment, the body remembered what the mind had not wanted to accept. They hated the training when it saved them. They understood it when it was too late to relearn.